Well, thank you for joining us for this Pix 11 Plus special presentation. I'm Kendis Gibson. A jury has reached a verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A 55-year-old music mogul was acquitted of the most serious charges. You see them all laid out there. There were 5 of them. Combs was found not guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking, the charges that could have put him behind bars for life. But the jury did convict him of prostitution-related felony under the Federal Mann Act for arranging cross-country travel for paid sexual encounters. Our Anthony DiLorenzo was inside the courtroom throughout the trial. He's telling us that after the verdict was reached today, "God is good" rang out from his family. Now, Combs' family was visibly happy with the outcome after leaving the courthouse. You see them there. Anthony also says Combs was stoic as the verdict was read. Afterwards, he knelt down on the ground in prayer. Combs later continuing to pump his right fist subtly, seeming to be satisfied that he was acquitted on the more serious charges. At one point, he blew kisses in the courtroom. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberations, and while Combs avoided a life sentence, he now faces up to 10 years behind bars. The case centered around allegations that Combs used money, influence, and violence to coerce women into drug-fueled sex parties with male escorts. His defense team arguing the women were willing participants and said the charges were exaggerated. Now, the conviction marks a stunning turn for one of hip-hop's biggest names and may bring an end to his decades-long career in music, fashion, and television. Well, joining us on Pix 11 throughout this entire trial, and again now, is New York entertainment attorney, Lisa Bonner. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kendis.
From the very beginning, you always looked at this case through the legal lens and believing that the prosecution really proved its case in the RICO charge. What do you make of this split verdict?
Well, as we talked about, Kendis, in terms of the RICO charge, those were very high charges. And it's a very difficult charge for the layperson to understand because you have several steps followed by predicate crimes, followed by 40 to 50 pages of jury instructions trying to deconstruct and explain that to the jury. So firstly, in order to get a RICO charge, you have to find that Combs used members of his company and commercial resources of his company to engage in the furtherance of the sex trafficking charges, and looking at that through the lens of force, fraud, or coercion. So that is one issue. And if the jury had found that, then you have to unanimously agree on the 2 of the 8 predicate crimes that fall under RICO, which are forced labor, arson, kidnapping, witness tampering, and a host of others. So it's a very nuanced and labor-intensive process, and one that is very difficult for a layperson to understand. But I did see where the prosecution was going with their case. I do believe, and I stand by what we have talked about over the time, that the prosecution was able to present an effective case. But all that matters in these criminal cases is what the jury decides. That is, the jury has the last word. This is not appealable. The double jeopardy has attached, and this is over as far as Sean Combs is concerned with respect to the RICO and to the 2 personal charges of sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura and of Jane. So it's a win for the defense, but not so much for the prosecution, the SDNY.
Yeah. That indeed. So, sentencing will take place at another time, but this is his first conviction. It's not his first run-in with the law. Many believe that he was responsible for the shooting that took place in the 90s back here in New York, including the person that went to jail for it, Shine, the rapper. But it is his first conviction of anything. Does he get any jail time?
That is going to be up to the judge, and the judge has wide latitude and wide discretion in terms of looking at the sentencing guidelines. As you mentioned, Sean does not have any priors. That is something that's going to be taken into consideration. Also, looking at the charges that have been dismissed, and those charges that have been dismissed carried some very heavy issues that could affect society as a whole, such as witness tampering. And that is something that once he is not found guilty of any of those crimes that involve the attempt to be a menace and up to society and or affect the outcome of the case. Once you get rid of that, the bar is lowered. And that is also something that the judge can take into consideration when looking at the sentencing. If I had to opine, I've been talking to judges and doing my research. I would say that most likely he would get anywhere from 18 to 24 months, but it is also possible that he could get nothing and walk away because of everything that we have just talked about.
And could part of that, just from a legal standpoint, could part of that also be considered time served because he's been in jail since September?
That is correct. He has been in jail for a very long period of time. That is something that the judge could look at and take into consideration. Again, the judges have wide latitude and wide discretion, and the sentencing guidelines and minimums are often misunderstood and really taken as the Bible in terms of what the defendant would get in terms of the sentencing. But again, the bottom line is with the judge, and the judge has the last word on what, if any, sentence that Sean would serve.
All right, Lisa, we're going to have to leave it there, but really appreciate your coverage and your analysis throughout this 8-week trial has been. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me, Kendis. This has been a very tough time for the courts, a tough time for the defendants and the alleged victims. And I think that we have really covered this with a lot of conviction. And these were serious charges that were taken seriously by everybody. And so we respect the verdict and we respect the opinion. And I thank you for having me on during this trial. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. We're thankful for you. Appreciate it. And coming up, more reaction on today's verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Our Jay Dow will share his perspective on the decision from the jury next. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're joined now by Pix 11 reporter and the host of Community CloseUp, our Jay Dow. He has been following, of course, this trial closely since it began. You guys do the weekly Dissecting Diddy podcast, and you've been dissecting this case from the very beginning. What do you make of this split verdict?
Well, good to be with you, Kendis. And, there's been a lot of amateur speculation, not just during the podcast, but, every day in court, wondering whether or not the prosecution was succeeding in making its case on those two most serious charges, the racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking. And now we know that the verdict was not guilty on those two most serious counts. The convictions came on the two counts of transportation for the intent of prostitution, otherwise known as the Mann Act. That law has been around for about 115 years, and there really isn't much discretion in finding out or proving whether or not that law was broken. And the government was able to, supply business records and text message transcripts showing that Combs was involved in making sure that male escorts and his two girlfriends over the period of several years, attended and participated in these freak-offs in different cities across state lines. The defense team certainly treating this verdict as a victory now that they know that a maximum term of life in prison is off the table. The two charges of which he was convicted face a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison, and it'll certainly, you can expect the defense team to offer a litany of mitigating circumstances, which they hope will reduce the amount of time that Combs spends in prison, if any at all, because again, this is all up to the judge's discretion. Certainly we are not done with this case yet. A lot more to come in the next days and weeks. Kendis?
And Jay, what do we know of his family's reaction to this verdict?
they were clapping. We know that Sean Combs got down on his knees and prayed. We know that they repeatedly said, God is good inside the courtroom. He had his children there. His mother was there. The mothers of his children were in the courtroom. And this was a moment where it was a collective sigh of relief, because again, knowing that he faced life in prison and the seizure of his assets, that was a nail biter for the family in the last several days, especially as the jury began deliberating. So what we saw was elation from the family inside the courtroom moments after the verdict was read.
And Jay, okay, so that is the actual court, the legal court. But the public opinion court, when it comes to Diddy and his reputation, where does he go from here?
You know what? I think we would all need a crystal ball to figure out exactly how Combs is going to navigate this journey that he has post-trial. There are a few things that we do know from past celebrity trials, which is the public in some situations has a very short memory. And image rehabilitation is a cottage industry. It would not be surprising to see Combs actively trying to rehabilitate his own reputation. And within certain circles, there was a lot of debate during this trial as to whether or not the prosecution was making its RICO case. There was a lot of talk that, hey, if this was a domestic abuse or a drug possession case, then the prosecution nailed it. But that's not what they charged Combs with. And so, to know all of the things that came out and to have such an inside look at his relationships with two different women over a decade plus, and you really got to see the inner workings of a toxic, abusive relationship.
Yeah. We kind of saw his dirty laundry aired out over the last 8 weeks. Jay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, and that'll do it for our special Pix 11 Plus coverage of today's verdict in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. For more on Pix 11 Plus throughout the evening, stay tuned. And Pix 11's coverage will continue tonight on the Pix 11 News at 10 o'clock on TV. For now, I'm Kendis Gibson. Thank you for watching.